So I don't know about you, but my favorite part of the Rosh Hashanah service has always been the shofar service, the blowing of the shofar. I grew up in an Orthodox synagogue where the services could be 4 hours long, and people would go outside and stand on the steps, a lot of them, and schmooze and socialize. But as soon as the shofar service came, everybody rushed back in to hear the shofar. The shofar is so important to the Rosh Hashanah service that one of the names for Rosh Hashanah is Yom Teruah, the day of the blast, the day of the blowing of the shofar. And according to the Talmud, the most important mitzvah on Rosh Hashanah is to hear the blowing of the shofar. And to emphasize how important it is to listen to the shofar, we blow it 100 times. So you have to ask, what's so important about the shofar? I mean, what are the meanings of those blasts? What are they trying to tell us? If you listen to the different kinds of blasts, the notes of the blast, you can get a hint. The first one is called tekiah, which we know is a long shofar blast. And sometimes it's explained as a summons. It's come forward. It's Jews, stand up. Recognize and admit what you have done wrong. Jews, step up to the plate and be honest with God and ourselves, and then take action. And others say that tekiah sounds like the fanfare before the entrance of the king or the announcement of a king's coronation. And this idea coincides with our first set of shofar blasts, which are called malchoyot, which means majesty and refers to the kingship of God. Tekiah tells us that it's time to face the master of the universe, to face our own behavior over which we alone have mastery, and to begin to make changes. The second note is shavarim, which literally means broken or fractured. And the shavarim blast are 3 medium-length notes. You probably know this, but they're compared to moaning, weeping, sorrow, reminding us that parts of us are broken and in pain and sad and need of repair. So shavarim ask God for forgiveness and compassion for when we have fallen short because of that brokenness. And shavarim urges us to use Rosh Hashanah for a time to repair that brokenness and to look to the healing that follows. And finally, the third note is teruah, which is a series of 9 very short staccato sounds that have been compared to an alarm, like an alarm clock. Da, 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 da. And our great sage Maimonides explains it to mean, wake up, this is an alarm. Wake up, you sleepy ones, from your sleep. You who slumber, arise and inspect your deeds, repent, look to your souls, improve your ways. So it's an alarm to connect us, to open our eyes to our souls, and to start to take action. So the sounds of the shofar are beyond words and carry very important messages that pierce our very souls. All we have to do is listen. We begin with malchoyot, which recognizes that we are not the center of the universe, that there is something far greater than us, just as a king is greater than his subjects. This section starts with the Grand Aleinu, where we prostrate ourselves in humility.
משפחות האדמה שלא שם כרכנו כהם וגורלנו ככל המונם ואנחנו Baruch Ata Adonai Melech al kol haaretz Mikadesh Yisrael Melech al kol haaretz Mikadesh Yisrael Melech al kol haaretz Mikadesh Yisrael Yom HaZikaron.
Amen.
Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lishmoa kol shofar. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. תקיעה, שברים תרועות, תקיעה, תקיעה, שברים, תקיעה, תקיעה, תרועות, תקיעה. We join in our Reshet Sifatenu.
הרשת שפתנו ירוק לפניך אל רם ונישא. הרשת שפתנו ירוק לפניך אל רם ונישא. מבין ומאזין מביט ומקשיב לכל תקיעתנו. ותקבל ברחמים ברחמים וברצון סדר מלכויותנו.
So another name for Rosh Hashanah is Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembrance, and this ties into our second set of shofar blasts called zichronot. Zichronot means remembrances or memories, and this set of shofar blasts asks God to remember us for the sake of our ancestors. And I have been thinking for a while, we can't ask blessings for the sake of any other Jews in 4,000 years. We're still relying on those ancient original Jews. There must be other Jews whose merit, whose goodness, we can ask God to bless us because of them. And there are many, and I want to talk to you about 4 amazing Jews that we could ask God to remember us because of these Jews who lived a lot more recently. So the first one is Julius Rosenwald, was a poor peddler who worked his way up to becoming the co-owner of Sears and Roebuck in like the early 1900s. And he met Booker T. Washington and became very, very impressed with him and his intelligence and his struggle to help educate Black Americans. And in fact, Julius Rosenwald gave money and endowed the Tuskegee Institute for Booker T. Washington, but he wanted to do more. And Booker T. Washington said, take a ride with me through the American South and look at the schools, these shacks, these ramshackle buildings that the South has given to our Black children as school buildings, as a place of education. And this we're talking about in 1910. Jim Crow was very rampant. It was a terrible time of segregation. And Julius Rosenwald was so moved that he paid for 5,000 schools in the American South during those years. He started the Julius Rosenwald Fund for Humanity, And these schools were called the Rosenwald schools, and Maya Angelou talks about it. She was one of the students in one of those schools, which were beautiful. He also endowed places for teachers to live. He gave a huge amount of money to help the Black community when nobody else was. So that's one person. Another one is Lillian Wald, who lived from 1867 to 1940. So Lillian Wald actually went to medical school, but dropped out and became a nurse because she lived on the Lower East Side of New York. She was so appalled by the treatment and the conditions for immigrant children and women that she founded the Henry Street Settlement House, which is a place for education, English as a second language, all kinds of support for immigrants, especially women and children. And she started the first home nursing society. If you ever watched Call the Midwife, where those nurses go to people's homes, that started with Lillian Wald on the Lower East Side. And she also fought for suffrage, and she was on the original founding committee for the NAACP. So she also was fighting for integration and rights of Black Americans in those times. The next person did not live in America. She lived in Europe. Her name was Friedl Dicker-Brandeis. She lived from 1898 to 1944. And Friedl was an incredible artist in Vienna and Berlin, the only woman in the Bauhaus movement, Jewish, and she moved to Prague and ultimately was deported to the Terezin concentration camp. And you're allowed to take 60 kilos of your property with you. She took a few pieces of clothing and art supplies. And what Friedl did, she created the idea of art therapy for children. She started all these classes to help children in the camps escape their horrible conditions through art and creativity. She is the inventor of art therapy. And she was sent to Auschwitz in 1944 and died, but she saved and hid all their drawings, and afterwards they found 5,000 of these children's drawings, which are now in the museum in Terezin in Prague. And finally, I could not leave out the greatest Jew, called the greatest Jew in America by the LA Times, Elie Wiesel, who, as we know, fought for the rights of all humanity, not just Jews, and was called by the Nobel Peace Prize Committee a messenger to mankind, who delivered peace, atonement, and human dignity as a message to all humanity. So perhaps you know other people on whose merit we can stand. Perhaps we could live meaningful lives and bring merit to those who follow us. We ask God to remember them and to remember us as we listen to zichronot.
כי זוכר כל הנשכחות אתה מעולם, ואין שכחה לפני כיסא כבודך. ברוך אתה אדוני, זוכר הברית.
Amen.
תקיעה Shvarim teruah. Tekiah. Tekiah. Shvarim. Tekiah. Tekiah. Teruah.
We join together in the words of Areshet Sefatenu.
Areshet sefatenu yerod lefanecha el ram v'nishma. Areshet sefatenu yerod lefanecha el ram v'nishma. Meivinu mazin mabitu makshib lekol tikiyatenu. Utkabel berachamim berachamim v'ratzon seder zichronotenu.
Another name for Rosh Hashanah is Yom Hadin, the Day of Judgment, and we can connect that title to the third section of the shofar service, which is called shofarot. Shofarot means the blast of the shofar. But if we look at the actual shape of the shofar, there are many beautiful midrashim. Midrashim, in case you don't know, are spiritual explanations that can tell us something about judgment and mercy and forgiveness on this Yom Hadin, this day of judgment. So this beautiful midrash I found is that the shape of the shofar, if you know, is narrow at one end and wide at the other. And that represents, if you want to do teshuvah, you just have to make a little opening in your heart, the small end, and God's forgiveness will be wide and vast as the opposite end of the shofar. Just make a small opening and it will help you move closer to God, and he will open the gates and facilitate your return. Another thing that the Midrash said is that when you blow the shofar, it starts out in the narrow end, which is God's quality of judgment. It can be narrow, it can be harsh, but by the time the sound comes out, it opens God up to compassion, rachamim, and mercy. So when we blow the shofar, we're changing ourselves, but we're also changing God. And one other final midrash I found is that we are reminded of the original breath, the holy breath that God breathed into Adam, to the human, on Rosh Hashanah as we blow the shofar. It's that holy breath that transformed him from physical into a living hybrid of spiritual and physical. So when we blow the shofar on the day of man's creation, which is Rosh Hashanah, it's a memorial to the first breath, the divine breath, and reminding us that we are all created in the image of God through that breath. We now listen to shofarot.
Yata shomea kol shofar umazin teruah v'en domelach baruch ata Adonai shomea kol teruat amo Israel berachamim Kiyas Shvarim teruah Kiyas Shvarim Kiyas Teruah Kiyah Gidolah Seder, 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 Seder,
Keeping in mind all the different elements of shofarot and zichronot and malchoyot, all of the three sections of the shofar service, and all of those calls of the shofar, we end this section with a prayer for peace, because our hope is that we can envelop all of those calls and all of the things that this shofar service represents with this circle and embracing of peace. And there's an added section at the end of Sim Shalom, which you'll hear that's only added today, and the translation is as follows. Let us and the whole family of Israel be remembered and inscribed in the book of life. May it be a life of goodness, blessing, and prosperity. May it be a life of peace. And what better way to end this section of the shofar service than for us to pray for peace and hope and goodness.
שים שלום, טובה וברכה בעולם, חן וחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל עמך, ברכנו אבינו, ברכנו כולנו כאחד, באור פניך, כי באור פניך נתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, תורת חיים ואהבת חסד וצדקה וברכה ורחמים וחיים ושלום. שים שלום, טובה וברכה בעולם, חן וחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל עמך, וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל, את עמך ישראל, ואת כל העמים בכל עת ובכל שעה, בשלומך, בספר חיים, ברכה ושלום, ופרנסה טובה, פרנסה טובה, ניזכר וניכתב לפניך, אנחנו וכל עמך, בית ישראל, לחיים טובים ולשלום, בספר חיים ולשלום. ברוך אתה אדוני עושה השלום.
Our Torah service begins with Avinu Malkeinu. Avinu Malkeinu, almighty and merciful, hear our voice. Avinu Malkeinu, we have strayed and sinned before you. Avinu Malkeinu, have compassion on us and our families. Avinu Malkeinu, halt the onslaught of sickness, violence, and hunger. Avinu Malkeinu, halt the reign of those who cause pain and terror. Avinu Malkeinu, enter our names in the books of life well lived. Avinu Malkeinu, renew for us a year of goodness. Avinu Malkeinu, almighty and merciful, answer us with grace, for our deeds are wanting. Save us through acts of justice and love.